Good morning, everybody, and you're all very welcome to day 2, session 3 of this Euragri conference. My name is Karl Walsh. I'm going to be your moderator for this session. If you don't know me, I'm head of the research division in the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine. So I hope everyone is well. We had a very nice dinner last night, courtesy of Euragri, so that was lovely, very nice Irish food. And I think you can look forward to some really good content in this morning's session, which is on national research and innovation responses to delivering sustainable food systems. Just want to commend Euragri for choosing the theme of the conference yesterday and today. It's a really strong issue. It's very core to what we're doing in the Department of Agriculture around research funding and research policy. And in fact, we had an event ourselves right here in Ashtown in summer 2022 on the very same theme. And we had a very nice presentation that day from Professor Joachim von Braun, who many of you will know is a world-leading expert in sustainable food systems, and his presentation is available still on our website if you want to go back and look at it. It's still very relevant. So just a few housekeeping issues for the session today. So in a similar way to yesterday, it is being live streamed, so we have an audience, a virtual audience online. You're all very welcome as well. The session is being recorded, so as it was said by Frank yesterday, just you should note that the session is being recorded. And there are fire exits around the room, so you should familiarize yourself with your nearest fire exit. We have 4 speakers for this session, 3 in person, 1 virtual. So each of the speakers is going to talk for about 10 minutes, and then we'll do Q&A at the end. And really the objective of the session is to get some national and international perspectives on how various countries are approaching research and innovation around sustainable food systems, particularly in delivering on ambitions such as we see in the European Green Deal. So, to kick off, we have our first presenter, Elizabeth Magowan, and Elizabeth is the Director of Sustainable Agrifood Sciences at the Agri-Food and Biosciences Institute in Northern Ireland. Elizabeth is President of the British Society of Animal Science, and she has also recently chaired the UK-wide consortiums of academics to deliver flagship reports for the CIEL on livestock farming and net zero. So Elizabeth is going to speak to us on this title here, How Can Research and Innovation in Agri-Food Production, particularly pasture-based livestock farming, change to meet the ambitions around sustainable food systems? So Elizabeth, you're very welcome. You have the floor and you have 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Karl, and thank you for introducing the title because it was quite long, so I don't have to repeat it. It's a real pleasure to be here this morning presenting to you, and hopefully in the next 10 minutes I'll share some of my thoughts with you around this issue. So first of all, I thought we'd start off with reminding us, if we need reminding, of what a sustainable food system needs to optimise. And of course, it needs to optimise the healthy society, a prosperous economy, and an environmentally healthy planet. So it's well recognised within this triage of challenges within a sustainability that the environmental aspect is the weakest link, and therefore, to be fair, there is a huge amount of money being invested in environmental orientated research at this moment in time with regards to agri-food. But I would have a slight concern that that may be at the detriment of animal welfare. Whenever I say animal welfare, I don't mean, whenever we think of welfare, we sometimes automatically think of animal health. Welfare is broader than animal health. It's animal well-being, a life worth living. And of course, the main drive towards environmental prosperity has a tinge of intensification, and it's that wider animal well-being and a life worth living that may be neglected a little bit, and I have a concern about that being a train coming down the road, that whilst we're improving the health of animals to improve the environmental credentials of livestock farming, maybe we're not totally considering the fuller definition of welfare in the form of animal well-being. Just one challenge. A sustainable food system also has to operate from soil right through to the sea. And a sustainable food system has huge opportunity to also collaborate with other industries. And what I've seen in some literature and papers, etc., is that there is an increasing recognition of this, and research and innovation is very much supporting that within ag systems, especially in mainland Europe. However, there's variable levels of recognition in some sectors and some countries, and I do think it's a huge opportunity for us to think outside of the food system and look at the soils, the sea, and the resources that we have to work in collaboration with our transport and energy sectors. Of course, then the farming community may then be concerned that the offsets that agriculture could support the transport and energy sector within inventories may not be recognised back to the agriculture sector. So there's a narrative and an education and an important communication piece there that should the agriculture and land use sectors support transport and energy reaching their net zero goals, that does need to be recognised. Then on to the nutty issue of, the ask was around pasture-based systems. And this graph, which I have to thank my colleague Teagasc for helping to pull together, shows us the probability of changing some of our land use from pasture to arable from a number of recent peer review publications. And as you can see from this heat map, there is a good part of mainland Europe could be converted to arable, but as you can see for Ireland and Scotland, parts of Wales, much, much less opportunity. So my point here is that, look, Ireland and a good bit of the UK is going to remain a pasture-based environment due to our climate and due to our soil systems. However, just because we're pasture-based doesn't necessarily mean we have to produce livestock and meat and milk, because Ireland, we will have a huge contribution to food security across the UK and Ireland, but we're not going to feed the world. Equally, getting rid of all the livestock isn't going to change and have a big dent on the global climate change crisis. So whilst we do need to contribute to both, actually from a carbon perspective, the bigger pressures locally in Ireland especially is around nitrates and phosphates, and they are affecting our local biodiversity habitats and our local waterways. So from a debate of land use, pasture-based land use, and the livestock on it, the question does come through to nitrates and phosphates. So I do think we need to expand our thinking, and research and innovation needs to focus on some of the innovations and then the behaviours as well of how we think around the use of our land for feed, food, but as well as that, fuel and fibre going forward. And I was really interested yesterday to hear our young farmer, Thomas, saying that actually, it's the first time I've heard a farmer in Ireland actually say something like this. Actually, it's about the income and then the maximum output I can get from my land as opposed to the numbers of animals on the land. So that to me was quite refreshing, that there's a slightly wider thinking that it's the value from the land and the value from our grassland pastures that we should be thinking of, and from a research and innovation perspective, expanding our areas into that. So I'm going to start changing my language, therefore, from a food system to land use. And I think a big nutty problem and a big nutty question that we have to address, especially within Ireland and the UK as a whole, is what is the safe operating space for our land use? In other words, how much produce can we make within the planetary boundaries of protecting our air quality, especially from an ammonia perspective, our waterways from a nitrates and phosphates perspective, our biodiversity habitats, whilst supporting the economy to its maximum and the health of our population. So what is that safe operating space for land use? Now, to achieve this, I strongly feel that long-term, systems-based, and that includes trans and multidisciplinary sciences within that, research platforms, which are then linked to integrated modelling platforms, are really badly, badly needed. We have a number of long-term platforms in our research organisations, but they're not as fully systems-based as what we would like them. And the nature of land use and farming and agriculture is a long-term game. So these long-term systems-based platforms, which then are, say, linked with those integrated modelling platforms to help us understand a safe operating space, are highly desirable. Now this, unfortunately, these platforms are very high cost, and therefore they can be high risk for funders to fund. And whilst the academic community tries to do this through combinations of funding that we get through our visions and aspirations, it's still very challenging and can be very volatile based on the funding model. And amongst all of that, we also need to adapt to a changing climate. So this graph is a piece of work that we modelled using what we have a grass check model in Northern Ireland, which predicts grass growth 2 weeks in advance based on weather forecasts and soil conditions, etc. And using that model, we stretched it to predict grass growth profiles in 20 years' time. So as you can see from the graph, we expect to have more grass towards, and this is for Northern Ireland, of course, this is probably already happening in Cork out to the shoulders, but in Northern Ireland we expect to see more grass growth towards the latter shoulder of the year. But the key here is a lot more volatility, as shown by the red bars, an awful lot more volatility throughout the year. So as we are developing these mitigations, yes, we are thinking about adaptation, but we have it slightly in the wrong balance, I would suggest, at the minute, and there needs to be a better balance between the interventions that we're looking at for both mitigating now, but also very much adapting, because this volatility is with us now and we're having to adapt now. Ultimately, collaboration within and between science and policy making is essential. And we do see that, and it's encouraging to see much more of that through various funding streams. For example, there's a LUNS hub has recently been a land use and net zero hub, which has recently been funded from UKRI in the UK, and that's very much to encourage interaction between the academic community and policymakers. And indeed, a lot of the funding mechanisms here, funded by DAFM and DERA, etc., are very much driving that goal as well. But we could do even better, I would suggest. We could do even better at linking industry, government, academia, and society into that network. And in Northern Ireland, we call that a Northern Ireland Diamond, which we're trying to establish. But I think what we're starting to see more and more so is, do we have the required expertise to help us really drive this across policy and science and industry? And I think we're starting to see a real skills gap. And we touched on this a little bit yesterday as well. Have we got the right skills in the right place? And I think we've got a little bit of a vacuum at the minute. We've got a lot of young people coming through. But there's a concern there at the minute, and science and innovation will have to support that in some shape or form. Ultimately then, science and innovation has to find ways to make sure that this science goes to the impact at pace, and we know the science has to have an impact, but it's the at pace bit that I think we need to improve on significantly, because we don't have time within the climate challenge that we have. So it's the at-pace bit that science and innovation has to find ways. I often think about, why are we so hooked on Facebook and Twitter, and that's what we look at in the morning? Why can we not get that mentality into the way farmers adopt new things or how we interact with farmers? So that's very much a psychology piece. And that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take questions in the panel. Thank you.
Super. Thanks, Elizabeth. That was excellent and stuck to time. So we're going to take questions at the end. So as we go through all four speakers, just keep recording your questions, and we'll take them all at the end. So next up, we have the first of our international speakers from Portugal, and this is Fatima Baptista. So Fatima is the director of the Mediterranean Institute for Agriculture, Environment and Development, MED for short. And Fatima is going to talk to us about the MED strategy for sustainable food systems in a Mediterranean context and a particular Portuguese context. Fatima, thank you very much for coming all the way from Portugal, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning to all. I'm sorry, I took some notes because, English is not my first language, and I'm afraid that I missed the words, so I will use some notes. My name now, it's Fatima Baptista. I am professor in the University of Évora in Portugal, and thank you for Mark, for your introduction. And also many thanks to the organization to give us the opportunity to be here and give the overview of the MED strategy to contribute to the sustainable food systems. Okay. Okay. MED is one of the, it's the biggest, at this moment, it's the biggest research center in Portugal in the area of agriculture and environmental sciences. It started in 2020, resulting from joining other research institutes that already exist, as it was ICAM. Some of you might know ICAM, and CEBAL, MEDITBio, and some researchers from CBU joined and became the MED that is now for almost 4 years. We have more than 400 researchers in our research center, including doctors, PhD students, collaborators, and the technical staff. And our focus is on the sustainability of the ecosystems and food systems in the Mediterranean context. The MED's mission is to contribute to feed the population, preserving nature under the climate change reality. This, in resume, it's our mission. And our goals are to improve the resource use efficiency and sustainability of food systems, assuring biodiversity conservation, develop solutions to adapt and mitigate climate change impacts. And in fact, we do research aligned with the SDG goals and with the EU Green Deal. Our research answers to some thematic lines. We are organized in thematic lines, trying to answer to questions that arrive from practice with a big collaboration with stakeholders, with the practice, and in a and interdisciplinary way. We have 5 thematic lines that are based on the value chain, which is the olives, groves and olive oil sector, the vine and wine, the agro-silva pastoral systems, specifically the montado, which is specific of Quercus species, and animal production and health, and also horticulture. And then we have 3 more thematic lines that are more transversal to all the other thematic lines, which are the governance, the rural dynamics and governance, the biodiversity conservation and the ecosystems functioning, and the irrigated agriculture. Sorry. We are organized in research groups that interact. As you can see, it's a mix. So we have work together. We try to collaborate. One of our main characteristics that we believe that makes the difference is the fact that we have in the same research center competencies and expertise, researchers working in the production, agriculture, and also in the environmental biodiversity issues. So we are in the same center, and we try to have a straight collaboration, a strong collaboration between us in the majority of the projects. So we are really multi-transdisciplinary. Also, we are the coordinated institution of the associate lab that calls Change, that integrates not only MED and 2 more research centers located in Lisbon, the SENSE and CE3S. And the goal of this research center, this associate lab, is to pass the research to the public policy. So to contribute to the definition of the public policy, the Change is the associate lab that do that. I don't know if you are aware of this kind of lab, but it's like an excellence stamp. When one research center has an associate lab, it's like an excellence stamp. So we are very proud to be a part of it, and it's important for the the policy for the definition of the public policy, as also Isabeth mentioned in her presentation. Also, one of our goals and of our the things that we believe it's really important, it's to be part of international networks. We are here in Euragri, so it's one example. We are associated in Euragri, and we are also members of the UNIMED network, which is the network of the Union of Mediterranean Universities for Knowledge and Training, and we coordinate the sub-network of food and water. Now, other aspect that we believe it's really, really important, and yesterday several of the presentations and the invited mentioned that it's the strong collaboration with different stakeholders, especially with farmers and farmers associations. And this is crucial, and we try to do that because it's really important that we as research centers we develop the technologies, the practices, but it is really important that they arrive to the end user, to the farmers, to the society. So we try to do that. We have some, and in this I show you some examples of projects that we do in straight collaboration with the society, with the associations, which are, for example, the sustainable plans for the olive oil and the wine sector that are really, that we, in the University of Évora, with a huge and multidisciplinary team, we collaborate with the associations to develop the sustainable programs of olive oil and wines. And also, the circular economy, it's also one of the areas that we are working, and also with a lot of activities and projects for knowledge transfer and training in this area. Of course, soil and water, well, we all know it's so important, and of course it's one of the key projects, and we are involved for example, in the mission, the EU mission, A Soil Deal for Future, and also the Water for All Partnership, Water Security. We are also involved in that. I'm not giving some details, it's just to tell what we are doing, and then we can talk later if you want. And yes, I will not be exhaustive in this. I just want to show you some areas where we are working, and that we believe that are really, really important for the sustainable food systems. It's the smart farming, energy efficiency, and again, the circular economy to develop the new technologies for the sustainability of agriculture production in Alentejo, but not only, of course. I'm almost done. In the frame of the resilient, the recuperation and resilience program of the EU, I'm sure some of you know what I'm saying. We have several running projects, again, related with sustainability, digital transition, the green transition, dealing with combining the production, the biodiversity, the climate change impacts. It's just some examples of that. And some other examples and other finance programs, Prima Life Horizon. Just to finish, and this is my last slide, Owen asked me to address critical issues in the transition process, and in my opinion, and in our opinion, one is to enhance the synergy between the research and the society. We have to answer to the societal challenges, innovate, think in disruptive solutions, and guarantee that we transfer to the society by training and knowledge transfers. Sustainable food systems are a key for the future. It's for complex systems that requires compromises between several solutions. we do not think that we will find one solution. We will find several solutions that could contribute for a better sustainable food systems. Thank you.
Thank you, Fatima. That was very, very good. And as I said before, we'll come to questions at the end, so please keep a note of your questions. Next up, we have Mark Fenlon, and Mark is head of the food program at Teagasc. He is in charge of food research, essentially, in Teagasc. He's a senior principal research officer and an adjunct professor at UCD and UCC. And Mark is going to talk about plant-based protein and bioprocessing in transforming sustainable food systems, particularly from the Irish perspective. So Mark, over to you.
Thank you, Karl, and thank you to Euragri for the invite. So as Karl said, I'm going to give a quick overview on some of our visions. We have over 15 projects running in this space, both at the centre here and the centre at Moore Park. So there's 2 centres in the food programme, and I think you've got a chance to see some of the facilities here. So I'm just going to focus on one, which is my own project that I'm working on, and it's also funded by the Department of Agriculture, and maybe talk around some of the others as well. I said I'd put up a picture of the Moore Park site because you've seen this site here, hopefully, and the heads of department and Declan are here. They can certainly show you our prepared consumer food centre and so on. This is the Moore Park site. We have a state-of-the-art pilot plant here, which is a company. It's actually run as a company. We have 13 companies on site here in the food hub. And then we have the research centre here, which is similar to the centre here. So I put it up here because it's going to be relevant as I go through the presentation. I suppose a number of years ago in the food programme, we started on the role of looking at what we can do in the sustainability area. And there is a whole load of different areas that we can look at, and we are looking at. But I think the one for today we're interested in is this one here, which is the protein sources. So if anybody's interested in any of the other areas you see on this slide, maybe we'll pick it up later. We did develop this in Moore Park as part of this, which is a bioprocess innovation suite. Again, this is for bioprocessing, and that's in my title as well, so I'll touch on that in a slide or two. I suppose the reason I have the dairy in the middle of this is because it does give us led to the concept for the project I'm going to talk about. And if you take dairy, I suppose you think of the milk in the shop, but that's not what we in Ireland like. We export 85% of our dairy, and most of that is ingredients. So when I talk about plant protein here, I'm talking about development of ingredients. And basically what we're trying to do is short-circuit that research evolution with the plant and be able to create ingredients from plant like we did using dairy technology. And we have done that. And in fact, we've spent time in around the globe in this area with specifically working with fractionating plant proteins using dairy equipment. So it's the exact same equipment that's used in some cases for this. And of course, this brings your value up. I'll just put this up very quickly, and if you look at the green here, you see all whey. That's just whey. Remember, whey is 0.75% protein coming from the milk, 0.75%, and you make all these ingredients from it. So the dairy industry has been doing this for years, and it's enabled by the membrane technology that's available today. And we have a specific expert in that working at the Moore Park site. So this is the project, U-Protein. It's funded by the Department of Agriculture. It's a €3 million project. There's 5 Teagasc sites involved in it. So we go all the way from our soil and land use all the way through to rural economy. We have somebody here was one of the leads of the pillars for the food side of it, and we have someone in Moore Park leading as well, so it's across both centres. And also all our research centres are involved in it. We've also 5 universities involved in it. And I suppose the real concept behind this, can we find an alternative enterprise for Ireland to sit beside our dairy and to sit beside our meat? So it's not to replace it, and then use some of the technologies I spoke of. And the criteria for selection of the crops, they must be grown in Ireland, potential for fractionation, potential to use the residual biomass, i.e. not the protein, the protein quality and safety obviously important, good sensory properties extremely important, and then potential for circularity. So that's the project. There is a website. So protein.ie, if you look at it, or uprotein.ie, you can see a bit more detail on it. These were the crops. I'm very quickly going to go through these, but there's more crops we have been looking at as well. Fava bean obviously grows very well in Ireland and so on. But there's a lot of others as well, including grass, and we've published a number of papers of fractionation as well of different grasses. And of course seaweed, which is done here in Ashtown by Maria Hayes, our researcher there. Some very exciting work done in that space. We have taken the protein out, we have taken other ingredients out. Again, we can maybe in discussion pick up on that. And this is the project itself. So if you look at this, there's 6 tasks in it, but you can see there's a blue line goes all the way back. So it starts with the land use and sustainability. And this is where my colleagues then in the other centres are advising us as to, can we grow it? Is it a break crop? Can it be used? Can it be counter-cyclical to our dairy so we can utilise our dairy processing capability and so on? So these are all the things we're thinking about. Plus, what's the functionality of the protein that we take out of it? So if you look here, there's a protein processing step in it. The person who's leading that is a background in processing fractionation, but the functionality of that ingredient must be emulsifier, it can be a foaming agent or whatever to be able to be used, or most importantly, provide a nutritional base for a food somewhere else in the world. And that's where a lot of the proteins are used for, so we can create and basically develop nutritional formulations and so on, but also used in different foods. But there are starches here, there are fibres here, other things that we're now building into the dairy process and so on. And you might see here as well volatile fatty acids and so on. So we have gone further than that, and my colleagues in the US, their big area, if they extended this out, is aviation fuel. This is a big one they're looking at. So it's a carbon source or a carbon source for precision fermentation and so on. Again, things we can pick up on. And here at Ashtown, we have a lot of work going on here, including in the area of packaging as well. So across both centres, we've evolved in this area. So I mentioned energy, I mentioned the fuel as well, so biofuels, and we're not a fuel food, I suppose. We're not looking at it from that perspective. We're looking at it from food. You know, we're not going to use, like in some countries they may use grain and so on for bioethanol and that. We're looking at the other way around. Fractionate up front, use the protein, the starch, fibre, etc. for food uses, and then if we have the residual biomass left over for biomethane and so on. So we're not ignoring the area of the fuel, but we would look at it that very simply, it's biomass. Take what you can out that's edible, and then whatever else is left goes into your energy sources and so on, and including things like aviation fuel or what people are looking at. Very quickly, it's a very interesting area because if you take something like barley, it's 10% protein. If you brew it, you've used the carbohydrate to make a very valuable beer. You've now brewer's spent grain is 32% protein, so you've just created a high protein value. And this is not something that's been researched, this is done. So in other words, there's plants in the US, they're producing this protein ingredients very effectively with very high protein concentration. So that valorization is happening, and it's the process here that we're talking about. Whatever the biomass coming into it is what we've developed and have done some work on it. But that's one example. Oats, for instance, are 10% or 10% protein, but you can get varieties up to 15%, my colleagues tell me, in fact even more. So, you know, you can push the protein up, you change the carbohydrate ratios and so on. So in a smart way, there's a lot of ways in which you can valorize different ingredients, and that's the thought process we have. On the biotransformation side then, I won't spend too much time on it, but this is the sort of 2 different systems again we're looking at. This is a bit more advanced, and if you go back to this one, you see task number 4. This is the actual biotransformation, so in other words, using bacteria to use the residual waste after we've taken the protein out, after we've taken the starch out and so on. And sometimes it's more valuable to actually use some of those residual materials for some of these things here, organic acid, biopolymers and so on. So this is work, again, Olivia McAuliffe, my colleague in Moore Park, is working on this, and she's doing things like carotenoids and so on, which she has developed from this. Again, this is the bioprocess innovation suite we spoke about. And this is our upscaled fermenter then that we have in the Moore Park technology. And just to say that, maybe to finish, because I have the last slide I think is coming up, we've big ambitions in this area. We've done an awful lot. We have developed ingredients for companies, obviously confidential, but we've also a big ambition to put a biocircularity centre here in Ashtown, because there are a lot of biomass streams I didn't mention, like marine and so on, and other areas. So at both centres, we're evolving the pilot plant we have to ingredients we can take directly out using existing dairy technology and so on, And we're also hopefully developing a more advanced centre here as well, specifically on bioprocessing as well. So we have big ambitions in that space, but both centres are evolving this way. And it doesn't take away from our core expertise, still the expertise that we use within our food programme to do this. Just to mention as well, we had a gateways. It's a way we have of disseminating our technologies to industry. We hold one in here in Ashtown, and we hold one in Moore Park every year. This was the one just gone by. It's interesting because Tom Hubbard there is probably the top dairy scientist in the world, one of them, but he also, Friesland, are working in plant-based as well. So most of the dairy companies now are also looking in this space as well because they have the equipment to do it, as well as the brewing industry, obviously. Tristan is from Aarhus University. You know, they've been looking at valorization of sugar beet leaves and so on for a long time. So again, you know, very interesting area. Peter de Jong is from NISO. Olivia leads the area then for the biotransformation forest. And then Patrick, obviously from the Department of Agriculture, Patrick Barrett. So we had this about 2 weeks ago. There is a document with that, so if anybody's interested, we can send that document on to you. Just to say as well, to mention that we have evolved now. We have a European project, ValPro, which is led by my colleague, Dr. Ewan Mullins, in Oak Park. And that project now has started, and that's looking at different value paths for protein ingredients. So that project has emerged out from the U-Protein. So it's, and we're linking in with our colleagues around Europe. And obviously then we have some projects already initiated with industry in this space. I suppose just to finish with saying that it is a global, because all our markets are outside of Ireland, it is global. We have to understand the functionality of the foods that we put the ingredients into, and that's, I suppose, the really important thing. And we've spoken to companies who didn't use plant ingredients because they fall out in their processes. That was their main reason, nothing else. And so then to get the ingredients to actually evolve and develop so you can get them through processes, they use the ingredients. So it's an ingredients market, which is a global market. Yes, they're commodities, but if you valorize the entire biomass, i.e. whatever it is, now it becomes valuable. So I'd leave it at that.
Super, thank you. That's great. And honestly, I didn't ask Mark to profile the U-Protein project because we're funding it, but it's very pleasing to see. It's very pleasing to see that project being profiled. So our final presenter today is Jørgen Olesen, and Jørgen is joining us virtually, so hopefully he appears on the screen in a minute. Jørgen is the head of the Department of Agroecology at Aarhus University in Denmark. His research interests include the adaptation of agricultural production systems to climate change, emissions of greenhouse gases from agriculture, and integrated crop production systems and modelling. So Jørgen has been asked to give us an overview of Denmark's roadmap for sustainable transformation. Anyone that's following this area of sustainable food systems will know that there's a huge amount going on, very exciting developments taking place in Denmark. So we're delighted to have Jørgen join us today. Jørgen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I hope you can see my presentation. Yes, indeed. It's fascinating times in Denmark. We are also getting increasing funding for much of what we're doing, and we're expanding both our research and innovation efforts. And I'm going to talk about the roadmap that we developed a couple of years ago. This was in response to government and parliament setting up what they called mission-driven activities. They had it in 4 different areas to underpin the green transition, both on the energy side, but one of the 4 missions were also for the food part of it. For much of what we are discussing when it comes to green transition, this of course has to do with mitigating greenhouse gas emissions. But we need to realize that when it comes to land use and food and agriculture, what we have, it's not just about the greenhouse gases, it's the environmental footprint in general, it's maintaining, enhancing biodiversity, it's phasing out chemical pesticides, but of course also contributing to the increased supply of food, bioenergy, and biomaterials, and we heard some of that already in previous presentations. And there's actually an additional element here that we also need to be concerned about to some extent, and that is jobs and wealth and creation and so on in the rural environments. So we developed a roadmap that were to underpin this for research and innovation. We divided it into 4 different categories: land use, plant-based food, animal-based food, and biotech-based food production. And overall, then, we also considered governance issues and so on, so which of course has to do with implementing things in reality. One thing that is clear also is that when we consider agriculture, food, and all of the rest of it, it's immensely complex at multiple levels, both when it comes to the flows of biomass, the processing, and so on, but also how this is perceived and taken up eventually by consumers, what is acceptable or what is not. But the other thing, of course, is on the land use part of it, the entire governance of the entire land area, but of course also what happens at the farm scale and in between, the processing, the management, the logistics, and what we have around the biomass flows. And we are increasingly looking into biorefining and processing and so on of different biomass categories, and how we can get the best value out of this, because in the end, if this is going to deliver, we need to have value creation. We also need to underpin this with accounting, not only of greenhouse gases, but of many of the other environmental aspects to it. So data and data flows and data processing and harvesting and using data also for the governance part of it is really essential. Another realization we need to make, in my view, is that when we're considering these environmental and climate impacts, it's really about the carbon and nitrogen flows in our systems. And so of course we harvest the carbon dioxide with our plants, and that feeds then livestock. It actually also feeds our soil and the soil fertility aspects of it, and all of the related biodiversity and so on. But in all of those processes, we also create greenhouse gases, and when we have emissions of methane and of nitrous oxide. But it's driven, all of that, by microbial processes. So an better understanding of the microbiology, the microbiome of these very different systems are extremely important, including what then drives those microbial processes and what drives the emissions. There's still fundamental research and understanding to be done here to create the necessary innovations that can bring us to much lower emissions in the end. If we, for instance, we look at the methane emissions from livestock, we do know that changing feeding and so on can deliver something. Changing or breeding fodder crops is another thing. We are looking into then specific plant species that may be delivering on substances that can reduce such emissions. But otherwise, it is likely going to be additives eventually. Now we have the Bovaer from DSM. The problem, of course, is that if we only have one of these additives compounds that is approved, available, then this is a monopoly, and we don't, as a farming community or agricultural community, have control of the prices for such compounds. We need more available technologies for such reductions, and this is one of the major reasons why we need more research and innovations to have competing technologies and effective technologies available. We are also looking into breeding livestock. We think this has the potential to reduce it by at least 10% the methane emissions. But there may be others coming around, such as collecting, removing methane. Even the one shown with the cow on that picture, the instrument from SELP, which collects and removes the methane. Whether all of these works, of course, we need to document and investigate. We're looking into, have been for quite some time, what we do with manure methane emissions. And this is an area where we actually have developed technologies, also competing technologies that are effective, and where we can bring down costs of this. We're looking at integrating with carbon management, the biogas in particular. So we have a very growing biogas industry in Denmark, which of course is, in principle, is very effective in reducing methane emissions from manure. But in the process, and to enhance the biogas production, we are seeing that massive additional amounts of biomass, including straw and so on. So we're looking at residues, not directly crops for this. But the problem with that is that the digested manure that we're getting there ends up having a very high dry matter content. So the fertilization value of digested manures have been declining. So we're now looking into how can we then further refine also the digested products, including with separation and pyrolysis, so that this is also ends up as being valuable products for the farmers and for the fertilization. Another thing, of course, is that when it comes to nitrous oxide emissions, which we mostly have from our applied manures and fertilizers and so on, the question is, what then are effective technologies to look into this? This is from a recent meta-analysis one of our postdocs did. It was actually a meta-analysis of meta-analysis. So more than 1,000 studies behind this, documenting actually, and I think this is actually really interesting and maybe also something that should cause us to consider a bit what the potentials really are. On the left, in that green box, you see those are effective technologies. They are documented to effectively, and in all cases, at least on average, to reduce emissions. So they're technology-driven solutions, including nitrification inhibitors, urease inhibitors, slow-release fertilizers, optimized fertilizer rates, biochar, this kind of thinking. Whereas when we are looking at those to the right, where we either have no effect or in some cases have even higher emissions, they are more in what you could call agroecological approaches, or maybe even regenerative agricultural approaches, where we also are more applying organic matter and so on, and in other ways trying to sustain the system. They're not effective for reducing nitrous oxide emissions. I'm not saying that we shouldn't actually be looking at that, because many of them are beneficial for soil quality and so on, but we do need to integrate also with effective measures here. Another concern that I have here is in terms of what can we realistically do with enhancing soil carbon storage. And if you just look at the graph to the lower right, this is a long-term experiment we had initiated in the early 1980s with increasing rates of straw application to soil. What you see here, of course, is that as we initially apply straw or remove it, we get a response in soil carbon content. But after some time, and in this case, maybe 10, 15 years, we've approached a new equilibrium or steady state in the soil, where we are at balance between the decomposition of the added organic carbon and the amount of carbon that is added. So just adding more organic matter is not a long-term solution. So what we most likely should do is looking at, again, technological solutions, in this case, maybe biochar, because biochar from various sources of biomass are much less readily decomposed in the soil, and we get a longer term offsetting if we apply that sort of material. This brings me at least to some intermediate conclusion here, is that we really need to think about technologies and how we can integrate various types of technologies into our agriculture, into the food system. But of course, we shouldn't do this haphazardly. We need to look if they are actually effective, if they can be well integrated, but also if they can be safely applied without negative side effects either on health, environment, or other aspects, which, in my view, may actually take also some long-term monitoring. But we also have another concern. We have a concern in terms of actually solving the climate, the environmental crisis, and so on here, which, in my view, means that we should look at rather quick adoption of many of those technologies, and at the same time, we also monitor their long-term effects and sustainability and safety of use. So, getting this into place is not easy. There are many issues here also related to investments. We need improved greenhouse gas accounting. We need really a data-driven agri-food system so that we can document all things from cradle to and from farm to fork and so on. We also need regulations incentives that cover that entire space. This requires investments in such a transition, and this is what we've been looking into in the Danish case, the research and innovation investment, which also needs increased capacity for this. It also needs partnerships, and we need funding for this, both for the research and technology development, but also for demonstration and implementation, going into living labs and so on for this. And it also requires that release commercialization and entrepreneurship. We've estimated that just for the Danish part of it, it requires about 1.5 billion euros annually to support this. You can read more about this because we have formed a partnership on this. It's called AgriFuture, and we've even made a white paper that details many of those aspects that I mentioned here and even more. And you can find that white paper online on the agrifuture.com website. It's really been a very interesting process also for me, being part of this, because I can see that the document that we developed and where we had more than 300 researchers actually contributing to has had tremendous impact, so that policymakers, members of parliament have actually used that document as part of their effort to secure actually substantial funding for research, innovation, and the pilot scaling. So that's all for me. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Jürgen. Thanks, Jürgen. And Jürgen will stay on screen for the duration of the questions and answers. So we have about 20 minutes, I think. Owen, hopefully that's about right, for questions before we break for coffee. So I know, looking at you, you were all glued to those 4 presentations. So hopefully you have questions. I have lots of questions of my own as well. So I might just start first with Jürgen, actually. So Jürgen, and I said at the start that there's a lot going on in Denmark that we're seeing over here in the headlines. So you've told us about this agri-food tour roadmap. We've seen that Denmark has published the world's first national action plan for plant-based foods. And we saw back in 2021 that the Danish government announced around 90 million euro for research in plant-based foods. So I'm just wondering, given those two latter developments, is that the main focus of the agri-food tour roadmap, or where does it fit? Are we getting the wrong impression that Denmark is going very much in a trajectory around plant-based food research, or can you expand on that?
Okay, yeah, no, this is a multi-pronged approach that we have, and plant-based food is only one of them. It may be actually gaining more attention, I would say, because it's novel, right? That we are expanding in that area, but we are also greatly focusing on the other aspects, including the land use management, but also the animal-based foods and also the biotech foods. Well, maybe just a bit less on the bio. Well, there is also efforts on this, but the most of the research funding and so on is actually going into the land use management and into the animal-based foods. But there it's just more like extension of what we're doing already now, whereas for the plant-based food, this is something we need to actually develop. Maybe I can, if I have to say another thing on the plant-based food, because of course a lot there can be done and this is also part of it, developing new products and so on. But I honestly think that we are overlooking the need to better understand actually consumer behavior and how we nudge consumers in what you could call the right direction on the plant-based foods. And I don't think there is sufficient or enough of that in our strategies yet.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Jürgen. And I mean, if you haven't looked at this agri-food tour roadmap, it is well worth going onto the website and reading through it. I mean, one of the things that struck me was the mission statement. It talks about powering a new generation of green export opportunities while protecting the environment. Something that I think if we put up first in a mission statement about export opportunities, there would be people that would raise eyebrows at that. So I thought that was an interesting aspect of it. Just on your final point, Jürgen, you mentioned about consumers and moving consumer trends, let's say, or habits. And Mark, in the U-Protein project, this is an important part, I think, this consumer dimension around testing, attitudes and behaviours towards some of these new plant-based proteins that are being investigated in U-Protein. Have you gotten to that stage in the research yet? And if you have, what are you discovering?
Yes, and I suppose there's a couple of elements of it. The first one is obviously the sensory. It's the number one. It has to taste well and look well and so on, which can be sometimes challenging. The other side is which may be lagging a bit behind, but is starting to catch up, is the understanding of the nutrient density of a food per unit. We'll say if you express environmental footprint of this food against that food, and you look at the percentage of protein, carbohydrate, minerals and nutrients, it's a little bit, can be a little bit difficult to explain on a label, certainly, but I think the consumers are starting to understand that. In other words, something that might have, a good carbohydrate content, a good fat content, but a low protein, this is a higher protein. For a weight basis, they're different. So in other words, like you're using this much water, this much energy and so on, it has this much carbon footprint, but you're getting a higher nutrient value out of that. So that's starting to evolve, but it's not something you get across on a label very, very easily. And it's a problem because sometimes, that can be an issue. But yes is the answer, and we are doing trials as well up in Queen's, actually, University, with our colleagues up there in this space as well. And we have made foods with the ingredients and so on and so on.
Okay, thanks, Mark. So we will turn to the floor for some questions. I'm anxious to bring in our audience here, and then we'll go to Zoom after that. So I have one question here from the lady in the middle.
Thank you very much for the nice panel. I am Minna Huttunen from the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry, Finland. I very much appreciate the balance of the different aspects of sustainable food system. We all know it's not easy, and yet we need to cover it. And the balancing is a challenge. I would like to go back to the Portuguese presentation. You had examples of the social sustainability, and I would like to dig a bit deeper into that. Could you elaborate further on the rural dynamics and governance examples to strengthen the social sustainability of food systems? But of course, any other person is also okay to respond. But social sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. It's one of our transversal thematic lines, as I mentioned. We have a group, a very strong. It's not so many people working on these areas, but they are very strong, very productive, and they work mainly in the Montado area. The Montado, it's the Quercus species. It's the combination between the agro-silvopastoral system, and they are very strong. They do a lot of work, a lot of training, workshops with farmers association, with several stakeholders, also regional or public or governmental, trying to pass this research to the community. And one of the things that we want to do, we are in Portugal, we are now in the process of evaluation of the research centers and the next submissions for the next period of financing. And one of the things that we want to do is to increase this aspect of governance to the other sectors, not only so strict to this one that is running now, but also to the other sectors, because we believe this is one of the very important issues. It's, as I think Jorgen said, it's to make this reality. So the reality comes to the society, and the governance, it's very important. I hope I answered you. Thank you.
Thanks, Fatima. And we do have another question in the audience, but just while we're on you, I'd be interested to know, in terms of the balance between, and coming at this from a research perspective, the balance between the adaptation research and the mitigation research. In Portugal and in the Mediterranean area, is there a huge emphasis now on this adaptation research? And you put up one of the disciplines in your institute around, it was plant genetics and biotechnology. And we know that there are discussions going on at European level now around the new genomic techniques. Is that becoming a bigger area for you, particularly in the context of adaptation research?
Well, I can tell you now exactly what is the balance between the adaptation and mitigation. I don't have a number to tell you. But it's a concern, and the group that the biotechnology, it's also increasing a lot to find solutions for these aspects also. It's the adaptation, the climate change impacts, they are there. Some years ago, we were discussing if this is real or not. I think now we know this is reality. And we need to adapt for what is coming, not only the mitigation, as also Elizabeth mentioned in her presentation. And yes, it's the strategy. It's to go also for that, but it's also an issue more. It's for the consumers. It's not very easy for the consumers to accept yet, and in Portugal, it's not completely accepted that some different food that comes from biotechnology to be accepted, and also because it's the Mediterranean diet. It's one of the things that I didn't mention, but we also have some groups working in the Mediterranean diet. That is really, we believe it's important also. So it's it's not contradictory, but it's two things that we go parallel and that we work also.
Okay, thanks,
Thank you.
Fatima. We have a question here.
Yeah, thank you, Karl. Wayne Powell, SIUC. It's a question, I guess, for all of the panelists, and it's really to do with the energy-food nexus. And clearly we're in a situation at the moment where almost the cost of energy is prohibitive, but how much scenario planning is going into a potential diminution in the cost onto a situation where energy was free? What would be the implications of that for the scenarios you're painting?
Okay, I don't know, does anyone want to take that? I mean, Elizabeth, you were talking at the beginning about the need to certainly get more collaboration going with these other areas of research.
So I can speak to the Northern Ireland context, and we have seen a significant increase in collaboration between agriculture and our energy networks and increasingly our transport networks. And to be fair, what we're seeing at present is a win-win for both food security and food production, as well as the energy agenda. And there's a couple of nice initiatives in Northern Ireland integrating industry and entrepreneurship in the space of energy generation and especially nutrient recycling from the slurry compounds in combination with producing food. So it's using the slurry produced from the livestock to recirculate the nutrients, but especially produce gas for the electricity grid and biomethane. And the economics is now the next stage of those business models. Those projects are moving on to the economic viability of these, and no doubt that will be the biggest challenge in this. But you're right, Wayne, that the price of energy has changed the dynamics within those business models as well. And we do see a lot of potential for a very much a circular system within Northern Ireland, which is a win-win largely for livestock and the energy agenda.
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. Yes, Jürgen.
Because I think this is really important. I mean, that there are two things, basically, that we need in society in order to have it working. One is food, and the other is energy. Those are basic, and we of course have to develop an energy system that is not based on fossil fuels. And in Denmark, we are seeing a great expansion of also the use of photovoltaics on agricultural land, which is going to, if we don't sort of control it, I would say in a proper way, that is going to take land away from our otherwise food production system. So we're looking into how can we also integrate this, and I think there are some benefits, and we even see that when we're trying to integrate this, we even get in some cases more climate resilient crops growing there. And the other thing is carbon, because even in a system that is mostly electricity based for the power production, we still need carbon based fuels for many of the energy services that we have. So I think carbon, and because we can most readily produce carbon within our cropping system, agricultural systems, that is going to have increasing value into the future.
Yeah. Thanks, Jürgen. That's really interesting. And I think this food versus fuel debate has been going on now for a long time. We've learned a lot. And here in Ireland, we have a formal land use review taking place that's looking at all of these issues and making sure that we strike the right balance. So synergies where we can take materials like slurry to produce energy that don't have that direct impact, knock-on impact on food production. But Jürgen, you make a very interesting point about the photovoltaics on land that would otherwise be used for food production. So it's a really important point. There's another question here in the audience. We'll take it here.
Yeah, thank you. This is Gottlieb Pasch from the University of Évora. I have a more specific question to Jörn about the potential of soil for carbon sequestration. Well, I think you yourself in the Smart Soil project found that European soils are still losing huge amounts of soil organic carbon. And it's always it's still a controversial issue whether soils are capable to sequester carbon, put carbon back into the soils. We know that soils are the second largest organic carbon pool in the world after the oceans. You presented a graph where you added different amounts of straw. And, well, I wonder how you did retain these amount of straws, because we all know that if we incorporate straw, then we lose again a lot through the burning, actually, the microbiological burning of the carbon that we introduce. And there is it's also well known that only the combination of minimum soil disturbance and addition of soil organic carbon through crop residues is capable to store a lot of carbon and bring it back to the soil. Of course, the saturation curve is very, well, fast achieved in the case of Denmark, but where you have originally quite high levels of soil organic carbon. But I think there are many other soils that do have carbon sequestration potential, which is much bigger, but only if the combination of minimum soil disturbance and addition crop residue retention is done. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, I do agree that there are places in the world where things may behave a bit differently from what I showed, and certainly the issue of conservation agriculture with minimum disturbance and residue retention and so on. There is more promise for that of also enhancing soil carbon in, I would say, the warmer and drier parts of the world rather than in the cool and wet parts like in Denmark. It's mostly actually related, in my view, to the fact that under those conditions, conservation agriculture actually also increases crop production, so that you end up fixing more carbon with your plants and also having then more carbon moving back. It's not necessarily that the microbes retain more of it, but you have a bigger input. So I think there's a need to look at this in sort of, yeah, from the system's perspective. I would still actually claim that in order for us to realistically increase soil carbon, we cannot only rely on that. We also need to provide some technological solutions like biochar that can have a longer-term soil carbon storage potential.
Thank you, Jürgen. Elizabeth, do you want to come in on this as well?
I just wanted to share with you some of the work in Northern Ireland on this. And like Jürgen says, all land is not the same, but we have a site at AFBI Hillsborough, which has a long-term slurry plot, which has had a focus on soil carbon sequestration over the past 50 years. And we have seen an increasing amount of carbon stocks in that soil under 6 different combinations of slurry application between pig and cattle slurry. So we have not reached saturation even after 50 years in that soil, which is completely bucking the trend. And of course, it is just one site, but Northern Ireland Government, DAERA, have invested 45 million in a soil scheme for Northern Ireland now, and it's just being rolled out, where every single field in Northern Ireland is being soil sampled for their nitrates and phosphates, sulphur, pH, and as well as that, their carbon stocks will be established. But within that scheme, we'll also be resampling approximately 500 fields that we sampled 5 years ago in 2017, 2018, to try and establish and ground truth the work from the AFBI Hillsborough site to see if indeed across those 500 fields we are seeing on balance an increase in carbon stocks and therefore an increase in carbon sequestration as a result of the land management practices, which is mainly slurry application to those grasslands over the past 5 or 6 years. So that's just for information to keep an eye on.
Okay, thanks, Elizabeth. I know we're running out of time. I have a question here, and Orla, is there something on the Zoom? Okay, we'll take the one here in the room first, then we'll go to Zoom and we'll cut it in.
Hi, Mark Moore from Teagasc. Just to Elizabeth, you mentioned an emerging skills gap. Could you say a little bit more about that and how it might be addressed, please?
How it might be addressed is the challenge. But I think what we see, this is a huge, complex issue that we are facing, and being able to think in a systems way is a challenge, for any mindset. But I think our training programs of our graduates, PhD students, folk that are going into industry, policy and science do need that really strong, holistic, systems-based thinking, bringing that to the table for the solutions. Having said that, we do still need the expertise to dig down deep, but I think that increasingly so we're needing individuals to think laterally, holistically, and to bring together these solutions. And I think that's the kind of skill base we're starting to see a gap. It's not to the detriment of anybody in it, and then the numbers of people with that is a real challenge, because this what's facing us is huge. And again, it comes back to the pace of change. We do need a small army of people thinking in the same way to actually help change the agenda within the land users, because it's going to be, no matter how much government policy we put in place, etc., it's going to be the land users, 26,000 of them in Northern Ireland alone, that need to change their practices and think laterally. So I think that's how we address it.
Yeah.
I think it's getting into schools is a big solution to that one.
And I know there are developments at third level here in Ireland and probably elsewhere on introducing more formal courses, formal training on sustainable food systems. That's something we're going to see a big ramp up in the next few years on. I know we're out of time, but I would like to take one of to use the terminology from yesterday, one of the Zoomers, Orla.
Yeah, there is a question there for Jürgen, actually. How far can existing technologies take Denmark, or indeed Europe, in addressing climate mitigation in agriculture and reducing greenhouse gas emissions if fully implemented?
Yeah, I mean, we have actually calculated this, and the question, well, part of the problem is, what do we mean by fully implemented? Because how much can you actually do? But when we look into it, it's in the order of a 50% reduction that we can get if we fully implement basically what we have, which leaves then, well, maybe a bit more than 50, but in that order. Which I think is a substantial way down, and not much of that I would say is soil carbon sequestration. It's mostly actually dealing with the reductions in the methane and nitrous oxide emissions, and also re-wetting quite some of our drained peatlands. This is still one of the major challenges that we have, is our cultivated peatlands.
Yeah, okay, very similar issues to ourselves indeed. So I think we'll leave it at that. I just want to, it's a very rich discussion. We could keep going on with questions, but we do have a coffee break. So just want to thank my four speakers here. I'm sure the other speakers won't mind me particularly thanking Fatima for making the trip over from Portugal. It's been really interesting. I presume the slides will be available afterwards, or feel free to talk to the speakers during the coffee break. Thank you all very much for your questions. Thank you to the speakers.